The dim hum of fluorescent lights buzzed over the worn wooden tables of the Iron Promise clubhouse, a converted warehouse on the edge of a forgotten industrial strip. Smoke from half-smoked cigars curled like ghosts in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of stale beer and engine oil that clung to every jacket. It was a Thursday night gathering, the kind where the brothers of the club came to hash out roots, settle grudges, and remind each other why they rode together, through storms, betrayals, and the long shadows of wars they'd left behind. But tonight, the air felt heavier, thicker with unspoken questions. Daniel Knox sat at the far end of the scarred oak table, his broad shoulders hunched under a faded leather vest patched with the club's emblem, an iron fist clutching a broken chain. At 43, he was a wall of a man, his face etched with lines that spoke of too many miles on the road and too few nights of peace. His dark eyes, usually sharp as switchblades, stared blankly at the flickering flame of a candle in the center, some ritual from the old days, meant to honor fallen riders. But Daniel hadn't spoken a word since the accident 6 months back, a high-speed wipeout on a rain-slicked highway, they said. Shattered helmet, coma for weeks, and when he woke, chunks of his life had vanished like smoke in the wind. Names, faces, the roar of his Harley, they came in fragments, teasing him from the edges of his mind. The brothers gave him space, called it the fog. But tonight, as the President Jax droned on about a shipment delay from the docks, the silence from Daniel's corner felt like a storm brewing. The door to the back hall creaked open, a sliver of cooler air slipping in like an uninvited whisper. No one paid it much mind at first. Clubhouse traffic was constant, prospects hauling in crates or old ladies slipping through for a quick word. But then came the patter of small feet on the concrete floor, hesitant at first, then quicker, echoing off the exposed beams overhead. Heads turned slowly, murmurs dying as a girl no older than 9 stepped into the pool of light. She had braids tied with faded pink ribbons, her denim overalls patched at the knees, and eyes wide with a mix of fear and fierce determination. Lucy. That was her name, though Daniel's fractured memory couldn't summon it yet. She clutched a crumpled drawing in one fist, the paper edges frayed like her nerves. The room froze as she weaved through the cluster of booted feet, her gaze locked on Daniel. The bikers, tattooed giants with knuckles scarred from bar fights and brotherly bonds, shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Kids didn't belong here, not in the heart of the club's inner sanctum. Jax paused mid-sentence, his gravelly voice trailing off. "Who the hell let a pint-sized in?" someone muttered from the shadows, but the words hung unanswered. Lucy stopped inches from Daniel's chair, her small chest rising and falling like she'd run a marathon. She looked up at him, the candlelight catching the gloss of unshed tears in her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice cutting through the hush like a knife through leather. The word landed heavy, reverberating off the walls, sucking the air from the room. Every eye snapped to Daniel. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. His hands, rough and calloused from years gripping handlebars, rested flat on the table, unmoving. It was as if she'd spoken in a language from a dream he couldn't quite grasp. A murmur rippled through the group, shock, confusion, a low chuckle from the back that died quick under Jax's glare. "Kid, you got the wrong guy," one of the younger riders said, leaning forward with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. But Lucy didn't budge. She unfolded the drawing with trembling fingers, holding it up like evidence in a courtroom. It was a crayon sketch, a stick-figure man on a motorcycle, a little girl riding behind, both under a sun that bled orange and red across the page. "You promised," she whispered, her voice cracking just enough to pierce the armor of the room. "You said you'd be my dad. After I ran away. You started the papers. The judge lady said it was almost done." Daniel's brow furrowed, the first crack in his stone facade. Flashes assaulted him, snippets buried deep. A rainy night, a bus station bench, a shivering girl with bruises hidden under long sleeves. He'd pulled over on a whim, his bike rumbling to a stop under the sodium lamps. No questions at first. Just a blanket from his saddlebag and a thermos of coffee. She'd talked in fits and starts, words tumbling out about a home that wasn't safe, hands that hurt more than they helped. He'd listened, the way he listened to brothers spilling guts over whiskey. and somewhere in that blur a promise, to protect her, to make it right. Adoption forms, signed in a sterile office that smelled of ink and false hope. Then the crash, tires screeching, world spinning into black. The brothers leaned in, the air electric with questions. Jax cleared his throat, his voice low and steady. "Daniel? You know this girl?" But Daniel's eyes were on Lucy now, searching her face as if it were a map to lost territory. His heart thudded, a rhythm older than memory, pulling at something raw and unnamed. She stepped closer, her small hand reaching out to touch his arm, tentative, like testing fire. "Please, Dad, don't forget me." In that moment, the clubhouse wasn't just a den of leather and loyalty. It was a crossroads. Daniel's mind might have erased the details, but the weight of that word, Dad, stirred echoes in his soul. A forgotten vow, etched not in ink, but in the quiet acts of a man who'd always ridden for the lost. The room held its breath, waiting for the biker with no past to claim a future he never knew he had. The weight of her gaze pressed on him, and for the first time since the fog rolled in, Daniel felt the stir of something unbreakable. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing hers. Rough against soft. No words yet, but in the flicker of the candle a spark ignited. A promise reborn from the ashes of amnesia. The brothers watched, silent witnesses to a bond that defied the scars of time. As the murmurs began to swell again, Jax raised a hand, calling the meeting to order, but the undercurrent had shifted. Lucy stayed by Daniel's side, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of his mind. Outside, the night wind howled against the warehouse walls, carrying the distant rumble of engines, reminders that the road ahead was long, and some rides changed everything. What if you pause right here, and in the comments below, share where you're tuning in from tonight? Drop the city or town, and the time on your clock when this tale hits you. These stories of forgotten oaths and reclaimed hearts travel far. Let's see how they echo across the miles, and at what hour they stir your own. The clubhouse air thickened further, the candle's flame dancing erratically, as if sensing the shift in the room's pulse. Daniel's hand lingered on Lucy's, the warmth of her skin a faint anchor, pulling at the frayed edges of his thoughts. Around them the brothers sat in stunned silence, their usual banter replaced by the low creak of leather chairs and the distant drip of a leaky pipe in the back. Jax, the president, leaned back in his seat at the head of the table, his weathered face creased with a mix of concern and curiosity. He'd seen Daniel through bar brawls, lost rides, and the raw grief of burying too many friends under rain-soaked graves. But this was uncharted territory, a crack in the unbreakable code of the Iron Promise. "All right, kid," Jax said finally, his voice a gravelly rumble that cut through the tension like a revving engine. He gestured to an empty chair beside Daniel, the metal legs scraping against the concrete with a sharp echo. "Sit. Tell us what this is about before the whole damn place turns into a confessional." Lucy hesitated, her eyes flicking between Jax and Daniel, but she climbed up without a word, her small frame swallowed by the oversized seat. The drawing stayed clutched in her lap, a colorful talisman against the sea of tattooed arms and shadowed faces. Daniel pulled his hand back slowly, flexing his fingers as if testing their strength. The fog in his mind swirled, images flickering like faulty headlights on a foggy road. The sterile glow of a courthouse hallway, the scratch of a pen on paper, Lucy's tentative smile as she signed her name with wobbly letters. He'd been there, hadn't he? Not the ghost of a man who woke up in a hospital bed with tubes snaking across his chest, but the real Daniel Knox, the one who'd spotted her at that bus station 2 years back. She'd been huddled under a flickering light, her face streaked with dirt and something deeper, marks of a life that had turned cruel. No family worth claiming, just echoes of raised voices and doors slamming shut. He'd offered her a ride on his bike, the wind whipping away her fears as they cut through the night toward the clubhouse. The brothers had grumbled at first. Kids weren't part of the rider's code, but Daniel's word was iron. He'd filed the papers himself, navigating the maze of social workers and hearings with a quiet determination that surprised even him. Now, as Lucy began to speak, her voice steady despite the quiver in her hands, The pieces clattered into place like loose gravel under tires. "He found me when I had nowhere else," she said, looking straight at the circle of men, her chin lifted in defiance. "I was scared, running from a place that hurt." Daniel stopped. He didn't ask for stories or pity. He just said, "Hop on, kid, we'll figure it out." A few nods rippled through the group. Rico, the club's grizzled mechanic with oil-stained knuckles, remembered that night vividly. He'd been the one to patch up Lucy's scraped knees later, grumbling about turning this den into a daycare, while slipping her extra cookies from his lunchbox. But the accident had stolen it all from Daniel's grasp. The crash replayed in shards, rain pounding the asphalt like fists, a truck swerving into his lane, the world tilting into oblivion. When he emerged, the doctors spoke of retrograde amnesia, chunks of life erased as cleanly as skid marks on pavement. The club had rallied, visits in the sterile hospital ward, Harleys lined up in the parking lot like sentinels, but Lucy had been kept at arm's length by the system, shuffled to a temporary home while the adoption hung in limbo. She'd written letters he couldn't read, drawn pictures that gathered dust on his bedside table. And now, here she was, bridging the gap his mind had carved. Jax rubbed his jaw, the stubble rasping under his palm. "Daniel, brother, you never said a word about this. We thought the fog took the small stuff, roots, old rides. Not this." He glanced at Lucy, his hard eyes softening just a fraction. The Iron Promise wasn't just about engines and open roads. It was forged in the fires of lost causes, pulling brothers from the brink. If Daniel had taken this on, it was club business now, family, chosen and bound by more than blood. Daniel's throat tightened, words forming like smoke he couldn't quite exhale. He looked at Lucy, really looked, seeing the girl from his fragments, braids flying in the wind during their first ride, her laughter cutting through the roar of the engine as they chased sunsets along dusty backroads. The promise hadn't been grand speeches or legal fanfare. It was in the quiet moments, the way he'd taught her to check the bike's oil, or how she'd patch his vest after a rough patch of gravel. "I remember," he murmured finally, his voice rough as rusted chain, the first full sentence in months. The room exhaled collectively, a wave of relief breaking the spell. But questions lingered like exhaust fumes. Why had she come now, slipping past the prospects at the door? Whispers from the back revealed it. The temporary home had faltered, signs of unrest surfacing. Overworked guardians, whispers of instability. Lucy had overheard enough to bolt, her feet carrying her straight to the clubhouse, the only sanctuary she knew. "I need you, Dad," she said again, softer this time, her hand finding his once more. "The papers are almost done. You can't let them take me back." The brothers stirred, a low hum of agreement building. Rico slapped the table lightly. "Club's got your back, Knox. Always has." Jax nodded, his decision made in the flicker of that candle. "We'll ride this out. Get the lawyers, sort the red tape. No kid of Iron Promise gets left in the dust." As the meeting fractured into smaller talks, plans for calls to advocates, routes to scout safer paths, Daniel felt the fog lift, inch by inch. Lucy leaned against him, her head on his arm, a weight both foreign and familiar. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, stars pricking the sky like distant taillights. The road to reclaiming his life stretched ahead, paved with loyalty and the unbreakable pull of a promise half remembered. For the first time, the silence in his mind felt less like a cage and more like a canvas, ready for the lines of a new chapter. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The first rays of dawn sliced through the grimy windows of the Iron Promise clubhouse like hesitant fingers, painting the concrete floor in stripes of pale gold. The night had bled into morning without fanfare. The brothers scattered now, some slumped over tables in fitful sleep, others already firing up engines in the lot outside, the low growl of Harleys vibrating through the walls like a waking beast. Daniel hadn't moved much, his chair a throne of worn oak, Lucy curled against his side under his unzipped jacket, her breaths steady and soft. The drawing lay between them, its crayon lines faded but insistent, a bridge across the chasm his mind had built. He stared at it, willing the colors to sharpen into clarity. The fog lingered, but cracks were forming, widening with each heartbeat. Last night's words echoed in his skull, her small voice declaring him dad to a room full of hardened riders, the way Jax's nod had sealed it as club law. They'd talked late into the hours, piecing together the fragments Lucy carried like sacred relics. The adoption papers, tucked away in a lockbox at the old safe house on the outskirts, bore his signature. Bold loops from a man who remembered little now, but the feel of throttle under his palm. Social services had stalled after the accident, citing his instability, shuffling her to a foster setup that reeked of neglect. Whispers from Rico painted the picture: overfilled homes, guardians stretched thin, and shadows of the very dangers she'd fled 2 years prior creeping back. Daniel's hand tightened on the table's edge, knuckles whitening. The accident hadn't just stolen memories, it had unraveled the life he'd been building in the quiet spaces between rides. Flashes came unbidden now, a courthouse lobby with echoing footsteps, Lucy's hand in his as they waited for the judge, her braids swinging like pendulums. He'd promised her then, under the fluorescent hum, that the iron promise would be her shield. No more running, no more nights hiding from fists or indifference. The club had vouched for him in affidavits, their loyalty scrawled in rough script. Brothers willing to stand as family, references forged in the fire of shared roads and shared scars. But dawn brought reality's bite. Jax strode back in from the lot, his boots thudding heavy, a steaming mug of black coffee in one fist and a stack of papers in the other, faxes pulled from a contact at the county office, the kind of favor that came with a nod and no questions. "Knox," he said, sliding the mug across the table, the ceramic scraping like gravel. "Lawyers are circling. They want a psych eval on you before any hearing. Say your head's not right for custody." His eyes, sharp under bushy brows, held no judgment, only the weight of command. The president had lost a brother to the system's grind once, a vet chewed up by red tape after the war, and the memory fueled his fire. Lucy stirred, rubbing her eyes with the heel of her hand, the pink ribbons in her braids askew. She sat up straight, sensing the shift, her gaze flicking to the papers like they were storm clouds. "They can't," she whispered, fierce for all her smallness. "You promised, in the office, with the nice lady who smelled like flowers. You said I'd never go back." Her words hung, pulling at Daniel like reins on a wild horse. He lifted the mug, the bitter heat scalding his tongue, grounding him. More memories surfaced, teaching her to ride pillion, her arms locked around his waist as they banked through desert curves, the wind tasting of sage and freedom. Laughter, rare and bright, cutting through his own silences. "I won't let them," he rasped, the words tasting of rust but solid. It was the second time he'd spoken since the fog. Each syllable of victory wrested from the void. The brothers filtering back in paused, ears tuning to his voice like radios finding signal. Rico clapped a hand on his shoulder, the mechanic's grip firm as a wrench. "Damn right. We'll ride to that hearing if we have to. Show 'em what family looks like." Murmurs of agreement rippled, plans forming in the haze of morning light, scouting the foster home's location, calling in favors from old contacts in the legal underbelly, anything to tip the scales toward justice. Yet doubt gnawed at Daniel's edges, a shadow in the rising sun. What if the eval exposed the holes in him? What if the man who woke from the coma wasn't enough to claim the promise? He glanced at Lucy, her face lit by the window's glow, and felt the pull deepen. A loyalty born not of blood but of choice, the kind that outlasted chrome and leather. Outside, engines revved in sequence, a convoy assembling like thunder on the horizon. Jax unfolded the top paper, a court notice stamped with official seals. "Hearings in 3 days, neutral ground downtown, no bikes in the lot. They'll use it against us." The room buzzed now, energy coiling like exhaust in the crisp air. Daniel stood, his frame unfolding with a creak of joints, Lucy's hand slipping into his instinctively. He nodded to Jax, the gesture sealing his intent. The fog might blur the path, but the road ahead was clear. Fight for the girl who'd pierced his silence, honor the vow his heart refused to forget. As they stepped toward the door, the morning light bathed them in warmth, the distant call of engines a symphony of support. But in the quiet of his mind, questions lingered. Would the system bend to a biker's word, or would it demand proof from a man piecing himself back together? The convoy rolled out slow, a steel river cutting through the waking streets. Daniel at the lead with Lucy behind him on a sidecar rigged hasty by Rico's hands. Wind whipped their faces, carrying the scent of dew-kissed asphalt and blooming creosote from the nearby flats. She leaned forward, her voice barely audible over the roar. "You remember the stars we chased that one night, after the bad dream?" A fragment clicked. Yes, pulling over on a bluff, pointing out constellations until her fears faded. "Yeah," he called back, the word a lifeline. The ride stretched, miles unfolding like pages in a book half read, each turn drawing him closer to redemption. Back at the clubhouse, Jax pored over the papers with a few trusted riders. The candle from last night snuffed, but its echo burning. Corruption whispered in the margins, overworked clerks, biased reports painting the club as outlaws unfit for hearth and home. But Iron Promise thrived on such fights, turning underdogs into legends. As the sun climbed, casting long shadows across the lot, the brothers prepared. Calls to allies, documents gathered like ammunition. Daniel's promise wasn't just his anymore, it was the club's, woven into the fabric of loyalty that no amnesia could unravel. By midday, they reconvened in the shade of the warehouse eaves, sweat beading on brows under the relentless sky. Lucy sketched idly on a napkin, her lines bolder now, bikes and riders under a watchful sun. Daniel watched, the weight in his chest shifting from burden to purpose. The hearing loomed like a checkpoint on an endless highway. But for the first time he felt the engine in his soul ignite. Whatever truths the evil unearthed, he'd face them head-on for her, for the family forged in forgotten oaths. The air hummed with possibility, the distant horizon calling them forward into the fray. The midday sun beat down on the Iron Promise clubhouse like a relentless forge, turning the asphalt lot into a shimmering haze that distorted the line of parked Harleys. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, the salt stinging the faint scar along his temple, a souvenir from the crash that had rewritten his life. Lucy sat cross-legged on a crate nearby, her braids catching the light as she twisted a wrench in her small hands, mimicking Rico's earlier lesson on tightening a loose bolt. The mechanic hovered close, his booming laugh cutting through the hum of distant traffic, but his eyes kept drifting to Daniel, watchful, like a guard dog sensing thunder. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the earthy scent of cooling engines and fresh brewed coffee that Jax had set to percolate on the battered hot plate. The president paced the length of the main room, boot heels echoing off the concrete. The stack of court papers clutched like a battle plan. "Evals tomorrow," he said, stopping to jab a finger at the document on the table. "Some shrink downtown, neutral as a snake in the grass. They'll poke at your head, Knox, see if you're fit to wipe your own ass, let alone raise a kid." His tone was blunt. But the undercurrent carried the club's unyielding support. No brother walked alone, especially not against the cold machinery of the law. Daniel nodded slowly, leaning against the doorframe, the wood rough under his palm. The fog in his mind had thinned since Lucy's arrival, memories surfacing like buoys in choppy water. Her first tentative hug after a nightmare, the way she'd traced the club's emblem on his vest with a fingertip, asking about the iron promise that bound the riders. But doubt clawed at him, sharp as gravel in a tire tread. What if the doctor saw through to the voids, declared him broken? The system had already painted the club as renegades, leather-clad shadows unfit for the light of day. Whispers from Jax's contacts hinted at bias. Reports twisted to favor clean-cut families, bikers dismissed as transients with no roots. Lucy looked up from her crate, the wrench forgotten in her lap. "You'll be fine," she said, her voice steady, eyes locking onto his with a faith that pierced the haze. She slid down and crossed to him, her sneakers scuffing the floor. "Remember the story you told me, about the rider who lost his way but followed the stars home?" A flicker hit him then, the two of them on a bluff at dusk, engine idling low, her pointing at the sky while he spun tales of lost brothers finding their path. He'd promised her stories like that forever, a shield against the dark. Now that promise felt like the only map he had. Rico clapped Daniel on the back, the impact jarring but reassuring. "We'll shadow you there, park a block out, keep it low-key. No need to give 'em ammo." The mechanic's hands, perpetually stained with grease, gestured toward the lot where a few brothers tinkered with bikes, their movements deliberate, a quiet mobilization. The club wasn't storming gates, but their presence was a force, loyalty etched in chrome and oaths sworn under starlit skies. Jax grunted approval, folding the papers away. "And we'll dig deeper on that Foster setup. Lucy's intel checks out, overloaded, corners cut, signs of unrest, nothing solid yet, but enough to question their fitness." As afternoon wore on, the group scattered to tasks. Calls to a sympathetic clerk who'd owed Jax a favor from a long-ago ride-out, scouting routes to the eval site to avoid prying eyes. Daniel took Lucy for a short spin on his Harley, the sidecar rumbling over potholes, wind tousling her braids and carrying the sharp tang of pine from the encroaching hills. She chatted about school dreams, drawing classes, maybe a bike of her own someday, her words weaving through the roar like threads mending a tear. He listened, the vibration of the engine syncing with his pulse, fragments aligning. The day he'd filed the adoption intent, standing in a linoleum-floored office, her small hand in his as the caseworker nodded approval. "Family's what you build," he'd told her then, echoing the club's creed. The crash had blurred it, but the core remained unyielding. Back at the clubhouse, tension simmered as dusk crept in, painting the walls in bruised purples. Jax gathered the inner circle around the table, the candle relit as a nod to old rituals. "This ain't just about Knox," he said, voice low, the flame reflecting in his eyes. "It's about us. The promise we keep. To the lost. The ones the world chews up. If they take her, they take a piece of what we stand for." Nods circled the table, fists thumping wood in quiet solidarity. Daniel felt it then, the weight lifting fractionally. He wasn't reclaiming just a daughter, but a legacy of quiet honor, the kind that outlasted scars and forgetfulness. Night fell heavy, stars pricking the velvet sky visible through the open bay doors. Lucy dozed on a cot in the back room, a blanket tucked around her by one of the old ladies who'd slipped in with stew and stories. Daniel sat alone on the steps outside, the cool metal biting through his jeans, a cigarette unlit between his fingers. The eval loomed like a checkpoint in enemy territory, but resolve hardened in him, a moral fire stoked by her trust, the club's unbreakable chain. He crushed the smoke under his boot, standing as Jax approached, silhouette broad against the moonlit lot. "Ready for tomorrow?" the president asked, clapping his shoulder. Daniel met his gaze, the words coming clearer now. For her. Always. The fog might linger, but the path ahead gleamed with purpose. Justice not in vengeance, but in truth laid bare. Loyalty proving stronger than any institutional wall. Engines hummed faintly in the distance, brothers on watch, the night alive with the promise of dawn's fight. If this tale of forgotten bonds and unyielding honor is resonating with you, hit that like button below. It helps these stories reach more hearts in need of redemption. The morning of the evaluation broke crisp and unforgiving, the sky a vast expanse of steel-grey clouds that mirrored the churn in Daniel's gut. He stood in the clubhouse lot, the chill air nipping at his exposed neck as he strapped Lucy's helmet snug under her chin. Her eyes, bright with a mix of excitement and nerves, searched his face for reassurance. The sidecar was loaded light, just a water bottle, her drawing folded carefully in his vest pocket, and the weight of unspoken fears. Around them, the brothers moved like shadows in the dawn mist, engines idling low to avoid drawing eyes. Jax had called it a low-profile escort, a few riders fanning out on parallel streets, close enough to signal trouble, but far from the glare of downtown scrutiny. Daniel swung his leg over the Harley, the familiar leather seat creaking under him, a sound that tugged at buried instincts. The throttle responded with a throaty rumble, vibrating up his arms like an old friend's handshake. Lucy settled in behind the windshield, her small hands gripping the edge, the wind already whispering promises of the road ahead. As they pulled out, the convoy melted into traffic seamlessly, Rico trailing a block back on his chopper, Jax leading from afar on a nondescript cruiser borrowed from a civilian ally. No leathers flashing club colors, no thunderous parade. Just quiet vigilance, the Iron Promise's way of honoring oaths without fanfare. The ride into the city unfolded in fragments of memory and motion. Asphalt blurred beneath the tires, the scent of rain-damp earth rising from roadside ditches, mingling with the metallic tang of exhaust. Daniel's mind wandered to the courthouse visit that now felt like a half-remembered dream. The echo of their footsteps in the marble hall, Lucy's fingers intertwined with his as they faced the caseworker. "You're steady as iron sure," she'd said then, her voice tiny but sure, echoing the club's creed. He'd nodded, signing the forms with a flourish that masked the doubts gnawing at him even then. Doubts about deserving a second chance after years of riding solo, chasing horizons to outrun his own ghosts. The crash had amplified them, turning whispers into voids, but Lucy's presence now filled the cracks, her trust a balm sharper than any painkiller. Downtown loomed, glass towers piercing the clouds like indifferent sentinels. They parked in a shadowed alley, a few blocks from the evaluation center, a squat brick building with flags snapping in the breeze. Jax materialized from a side street, his face set in grim lines. "We're here if you need us." Rico's got eyes on the doors. He clapped Daniel's shoulder, the grip conveying volumes. No retreat, no surrender. Lucy hopped out, her sneakers hitting pavement with a soft thud, and took Daniel's hand without hesitation. "Like the story," she murmured, squeezing. "Follow the stars." He managed a nod, the words anchoring him as they walked the final stretch, the city's hum, honking cabs, pedestrian chatter, fading into a tense hush. Inside, the center smelled of stale coffee and polished wood, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects. A receptionist with a clipboard directed them to a waiting room lined with faded magazines and plastic chairs that groaned under weight. Daniel's pulse thrummed, each tick a reminder of the stakes. The psychologist, Dr. Harlan, a wiry man in a rumpled suit, glasses perched on a beakish nose, greeted them with clinical detachment, ushering Daniel into a small office, while an aide stayed with Lucy in the hall. The room was sparse, a desk cluttered with files, a window overlooking a parking garage, the faint tick of a wall clock marking time like a countdown. "Sit, Mr. Knox," Harlan said, gesturing to a chair that faced his own, a notepad balanced on his knee. No preamble, just questions probing like cold fingers into fog-shrouded corners. "Tell me about the accident." Daniel recounted it haltingly, the rain-slick highway, the swerve, the blackout, his voice gravelly, unused to dissection. Harlan nodded, scribbling, then pivoted. "And your memory? What do you recall of the last 2 years?" The void yawned, but Lucy's face flickered in his mind's eye, pulling details forth. Rides, open roads, a kid. Found her at a station, scared. Promised to keep her safe. He described the adoption process in broad strokes, the forms, the hearings, the club's quiet endorsements, omitting the raw edges, the nights he'd lain awake wondering if he was whole enough to be a father. Harlan leaned forward, eyes narrowing behind lenses. A promise. That's a heavy word for a man with gaps in his recall. How do you know it's real, not confabulation? The term hung clinical and cutting, stirring defensiveness in Daniel's chest. He thought of the drawing in his pocket, the warmth of her hand in his during rides, the way her laughter had chipped away at his solitude long before the crash. "Feels real," he said, meeting the doctor's gaze. "Deeper than words. Heart knows what the head forgets." Harlan paused, pen hovering, then shifted to hypotheticals, scenarios of stress, daily routines, how he'd handle Lucy's needs amid club life. Daniel answered steady, drawing on fragments, the way he'd taught her to spot loose chains on a bike, or soothed her after a storm with tales of resilient riders. No violence in his words, just the quiet honor of protection, the moral fiber woven into every mile. Outside, Lucy waited, flipping through a picture book the aide provided, but her ears strained toward the door. The aide chatted idly, but tension coiled in the air, thick as the institutional polish on the floors. In the office, Harlan set his notepad aside, his expression unreadable. "The system requires certainty, Mr. Knox. Amnesia complicates that, but intent matters. He glanced at his watch, the session winding down with a referral for further tests. No verdict yet, just a bridge to the hearing. Daniel rose, the chair scraping like a reluctant admission, relief and resolve mingling in his veins. The fog hadn't cleared entirely, but facing it head-on had forged something stronger, a clarity born of vulnerability, the promise to Lucy etched now in the present, unerasable. They emerged into the hallway, Lucy bounding up to wrap her arms around his waist. "How'd it go?" she asked, eyes wide. He ruffled her braids, the gesture automatic, familiar. "Steady as iron," he echoed, the club's mantra fitting like a well-worn glove. Harlan followed, handing over a folder, his nod almost approving. "We'll see you at the hearing. Be honest, that's your best ride." As they stepped back into the daylight, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of blue, Jax's cruiser idled at the corner, a subtle signal all clear. The brothers reconvened en route, engines sinking in the rear view, their loyalty a tailwind pushing against the headwinds of doubt. Back on the highway, wind rushing past like exhaled breaths, Daniel felt the pieces align further. The eval hadn't shattered him, it had tested the core, revealing a man rebuilt from ruins, driven by a bond that amnesia couldn't touch. Lucy chattered about lunch, burgers at the roadside diner, extra fries, her normalcy a counterpoint to the morning's gravity. Yet shadows lingered, the hearing in 2 days. The foster system's grip tightening with each bureaucratic loop. Whispers from Jax via radio hinted at deeper issues, reports of instability at Lucy's temporary home, echoes of the neglect she'd fled. The club would dig, turn over stones without shattering the peace, their justice poetic and patient. By late afternoon, the convoy dispersed at the clubhouse, dust settling like a sigh. Daniel lifted Lucy from the sidecar, her weight light but profound, and carried her inside where Rico had stew simmering. The brothers gathered loosely, sharing nods and low words, no victory laps, just the steady hum of solidarity. Jax pulled Daniel aside, voice pitched low. "You held. That's what counts. Now we gear up for the real fight." Daniel met his eyes, the fog receding like mist under sun, replaced by a fierce determination. The promise to Lucy wasn't just survival, it was redemption, a legacy of chosen family prevailing against the indifferent grind. As evening fell, stars emerging one by one, he knew the road twisted on, but with her hand in his he'd navigate every curve. The evening shadows stretched long across the Iron Promise clubhouse lot, the sun dipping behind the jagged hills like a weary rider calling it quits. Daniel sat on the weathered steps, the cool bite of metal seeping through his jeans, a half-empty coffee mug balanced on his knee. Steam curled lazily into the air, carrying the rich, bitter scent that grounded him amid the swirl of the day's aftermath. Lucy played nearby, her laughter punctuating the low murmur of brothers tinkering with engines, Rico's wrench clinking rhythmically against chrome, the occasional hiss of a socket loosening a stubborn bolt. The evaluation had left its mark, not as a wound but as a forge, hammering out sharper edges to the man emerging from the fog. Inside, the main room hummed with purpose, the air thick with the aroma of Rico's stew bubbling on the hot plate, chunks of beef and potatoes simmering in a gravy laced with herbs from some forgotten roadside patch. Jax had spread the eval folder across the oak table, its pages illuminated by the soft glow of hanging bulbs that swayed gently from a draft slipping through the cracks. "Harlan's notes are clean," the president said, his voice a steady rumble as he traced a finger along the lines. "No red flags on stability. Mentions your resilient intent. Fancy talk for holding your ground." He looked up, eyes meeting Daniel's across the room, a nod passing between them like a silent rev of engines syncing up. Daniel rose, mug in hand, and crossed to the table, the concrete cool under his boots. The words on the page blurred slightly at first, but focus sharpened them. References to the adoption intent, the club's role as extended support. Even a footnote on how shared narratives could bridge memory gaps. It wasn't a full endorsement, just a stepping stone to the hearing tomorrow, but it felt like traction on loose gravel, enough to keep moving. "Intent," he echoed, the word tasting solid on his tongue. Flashes came unbidden, The day he'd first brought Lucy to the clubhouse, her wide eyes taking in the sea of leather and steel, the brothers circling warily before one by one, offering a gruff welcome, a pat on the head, a candy from a vest pocket. That intent had built walls around her, brick by quiet brick, against the storms she'd known. Lucy wandered in, wiping her hands on her overalls, the pink ribbons in her braids now frayed from the day's wind. She climbed onto a stool beside Daniel, peering at the papers with a curiosity that bordered on defiance. "Does it say I can stay?" she asked, her voice small but threaded with hope, fingers tracing the edge of the folder like it held secrets. Daniel set his mug down, the ceramic clinking softly, and pulled her close, the warmth of her against his side, stirring deeper recollections. "It's a start, kid. Tomorrow we make it stick." He remembered now, clearer than before, evenings in the safe house, reading her dog-eared books under a single lamp, her head on his shoulder, as stories of brave riders wove through the night. Those moments hadn't been erased. They'd been waiting, patient as embers under ash. But the calm fractured with a sharp knock at the bay door, 3 raps, deliberate, not the casual thud of a brother returning. Jax tensed, hand drifting toward the drawer where a flashlight doubled as a signal tool, but Rico waved him off, peering through the peephole. "It's Elena, from the aid network," he muttered, swinging the door wide. She stepped in, a compact woman in a wool coat dusted with road grit, her face lined with the exhaustion of too many lost causes. Jax's contact from the underbelly of social services, she'd bent rules before for the club, slipping files, vouching for riders in tight spots. Tonight her eyes held urgency, a folder of her own tucked under her arm. "Couldn't wait," she said, voice low as she glanced at Lucy, softening just a fraction. "Hearings stacked against you. The foster coordinator pulled strings. Reports on the home are buried, but I got wind." Instability's an understatement. Overcrowding, lapses in oversight, echoes of the troubles that sent her running in the first place. She spread her copies on the table, the papers whispering like dry leaves, whispers of neglect, not outright harm, but enough to paint the place as a revolving door for the vulnerable. Daniel's jaw tightened, the fog parting to reveal the bus station night in stark relief, Lucy's huddled form, the faint tremors in her frame from cold and worse. He'd vowed then, under the flickering lights, to end that cycle. No more shuffling, no more indifferent hands. Jax leaned in, scanning the docks, his brow furrowing like storm clouds gathering. This could flip it. Proof the system's failing her worse than any unfit biker. Elena nodded, but her gaze lingered on Daniel. "They'll grill you on the amnesia, paint it as risk, but if you show the bond—" She trailed off, gesturing to Lucy, who clutched Daniel's arm, her presence a living testament. The room fell quiet save for the stew's gentle bubble and the distant call of a nightbird outside. Rico paced, fists clenched, the mechanic's usual humor edged with steel. "We ride clean, but we don't bend. Club's word is iron. Let 'em test it." As Eleanor slipped out into the night, her taillights fading down the access road, the brothers circled tighter. Plans formed in hushed tones. Jax coordinating with a pro bono advocate who'd cut his teeth on underdog cases. Rico prepping a discreet scout of the foster site at first light. No confrontation, just eyes and ears gathering the unspoken truths. Daniel lifted Lucy onto his lap, her weight a steadying force, and felt the pull of the promise sharpen into resolve. Memories flooded now, not in chaos but in sequence, the judge's gavel nearly sealing it before the crash, her excited skip from the courthouse, the wind in her hair on their victory ride. The hearing wasn't just legal theater, it was a moral reckoning. Justice wrested from corruption's grip through loyalty's unyielding hold. Night deepened, the clubhouse settling into watchful quiet. Lucy dozed against him, her breaths even, dreams safe under the roof of chosen kin. Daniel stared at the ceiling beams, scarred from years of hangs and heartfelt confessions, the scent of stew lingering like a comforting haze. Doubt flickered. Would the judge see beyond the leather, the fog, to the heart of the man who'd chosen family over solitude? But Jax's voice cut through from the doorway, low and sure. "We got your 6, Knox, always. The words echoed the creed, binding them in a chain stronger than steel. Outside, stars wheeled overhead, indifferent witnesses to the fray. Engines idled faintly in the lot, brothers taking shifts, the rumble a lullaby of protection. Daniel closed his eyes, the fog now a mere veil, translucent against the light of tomorrow's fight. The road to redemption twisted sharp, but with Lucy's trust in the club's unbreakable oath, he'd navigate it, honor intact, promise fulfilled, a legacy carved not in violence but in the quiet triumph of standing firm. Dawn would break soon, carrying them into the heart of the storm, where truth would outride any shadow. The courtroom smelled of polished oak and stale air, the kind that clung to the walls like unspoken regrets, filtered through high windows that let in slivers of morning light. Daniel sat rigid in the wooden pew, his leather vest traded for a plain button-down that felt like a straitjacket against his skin, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar. Lucy perched beside him, her small hand swallowed in his, her braids neat with fresh ribbons, courtesy of one of the old ladies back at the clubhouse. The room buzzed faintly. Murmurs from the back benches where Jax and a handful of brothers sat in subdued rows, their presence a quiet thunder. No colors flashed, but loyalty etched in every squared shoulder. Rico shifted beside Jax, his oil-stained fingers drumming silently on his knee, eyes locked forward like sentinels on a ridge. The judge, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, entered with a rustle of robes, the gavel's sharp crack echoing off the vaulted ceiling like a starter's pistol. She scanned the room, her gaze lingering on Daniel a beat too long, weighing the man pieced together from fragments against the folder of reports before her. The foster coordinator, a pinched-faced man in a grey suit, rose first, his voice clipped and mechanical as he laid out the case. Instability at the temporary home downplayed as transitional challenges, Daniel's amnesia painted as a chasm too wide for responsibility. The subject exhibits significant cognitive gaps, he intoned, gesturing to Harlan's eval notes. Adoption requires certainty, not conjecture. The child's welfare demands a stable environment, free from unconventional influences. Daniel's grip tightened on Lucy's hand, the warmth of her palm, a tether pulling him through the fog's remnants. Flashes assaulted him, the bus station's sodium glow, her tentative steps toward his bike, the wind carrying away her first real laugh on a desert run. He'd built this not on grand gestures, but on the steady rhythm of small acts. Mornings checking her backpack for school, evenings under the stars, trading stories of riders who bent but never broke. The coordinator's words twisted it all, reducing the iron promise to shadows. But Daniel held steady, his jaw set like forged steel. Then Elena took the stand, her wool coat shed for a simple blouse, her testimony unfolding like a map revealing hidden paths. She spoke of the foster setup's fractures, overcrowding veiled as efficiency, lapses in care that echoed the dangers Lucy had fled, reports shuffled aside by overburdened desks. The system meant well, she said, her voice even but edged with quiet fire, but intent without action leaves voids. Mr. Knox filled one for this girl when no one else could. The judge leaned forward, pen scratching notes, the room's hush broken only by the faint creak of benches as the brothers absorbed each word. Jax's eyes met Daniel's across the aisle, a nod passing like a relay of resolve. No retreat, just the unyielding push forward. When Daniel's turn came, he rose slow, the floorboards groaning under his boots, and approached the stand with Lucy's drawing folded in his pocket like a talisman. The bailiff swore him in, the words blurring into ritual, and Harlan's questions from the eval replayed in his mind, probes into the voids, tests of the man beneath. I lost pieces of myself in that crash, he began, his voice rough but clear, carrying to the back where Rico's nod spurred him on. Roads, names, rides, they faded, but not her, not the promise. He described it in measured strokes, spotting Lucy at the station, the shiver in her frame from more than cold, the decision to stop because some calls you can't ignore, the adoption forms signed in that ink-scented office, the club's quiet vows as family, references from men who'd pulled him from his own wreckage now standing for hers. The judge's eyes softened fractionally as he spoke of the bond, not as legal lines, but as lived truth. teaching her to feel the engine's hum, her sketches of their rides taped to the safehouse fridge, the way her trust had mended cracks he didn't know were there. "Amnesia's a thief," he admitted, meeting the woman's gaze, "but it didn't steal the heart of it. She's my daughter, chosen, and I'll ride that road every day to prove it." Lucy watched from the bench, her chin lifted, tears glossing but not falling, her presence amplifying his words like sunlight breaking clouds. The coordinator cross-examined, jabbing at the club's lifestyle, the amnesia as liability, but Daniel didn't flinch. "We choose our kin," he countered, voice steady as a low-revving Harley. "And we keep promises that outlast the miles." Whispers rippled, Jax's low grunt of approval, Rico's fist unclenching. Harlan followed, affirming the avowal. Resilient intent, no barriers to capacity. The bond a bridge stronger than memory alone. Elena's documents sealed the cracks, exposing the foster system's moral erosion, justice tilting not through force but revelation. The judge recessed briefly, the room exhaling in the pause, Daniel returning to Lucy's side where she whispered, "Like the stars, Dad. You followed." He ruffled her braids, the gesture anchoring him as the gavel called them back. Minutes stretched like highway miles, then her voice rang clear. "Custody granted to Daniel Knox. Full adoption proceedings expedited. The court recognizes a family forged in commitment, not circumstance." The words landed soft but seismic, the room erupting in restrained relief. Jax's broad smile, Rico's whoop muffled quick. Lucy launched into Daniel's arms, her hug fierce, the scent of her shampoo mingling with the courtroom's polish, a new chapter etched in that embrace. Outside, the sun broke fully through, bathing the steps in gold as the convoy reformed, engines purring low, brothers flanking them like an honor guard. No roars, just the steady roll out, wind whipping braids and vests as they cut toward the horizon. Daniel felt the fog dissolve entirely, memories solid now, her first dad in the clubhouse. The promise reborn in public gaze, the redemption not in erasing scars but carrying them forward with kin at his back. The road stretched endless, but with Lucy's laughter trailing in the slipstream and the iron promise's chain unbroken, every mile hummed with honor's quiet victory, a legacy of loyalty where chosen hearts outrode any storm. Thanks for riding along on this journey of lost memories and unbreakable bonds. If Daniel and Lucy's story stirred something in you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more tales of honor, redemption, and the open road waiting just ahead.